For this webinar. My name is Clémence Dallaire and I'm full professor at Laval University's Faculty of Nursing. I'm happy to welcome you, all of you, to the November session of the 2020-2021 Lunch and Learn series. Before we begin, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session will begin with a presentation from our speakers, and we'll conclude with a 15 to 20 minutes Q&A. After the presentation, we will take questions. You can submit questions. You can use the Q&A chat function on your screen, at the bottom of your screen. Once you have finished typing your question, please don't forget to hit send. Alternatively, if you would like to discuss something with our presenters, please press the raise hand button. I will state your name, or Julia will, CASN staff, and she will unmute you so you can ask your question. I will ask that if your question is asked by another participant, that you press the lower hand button so that you can get through as many unique questions as possible. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the concept of the lunch and learn, where faculty members come together during their lunch hours to share with one another projects they are working on and to dialogue and discuss methods, successes, and challenges they encounter in their work. This webinar series is intended to serve as an inspiration and a networking opportunity for participants while recreating the collegial feel of the Lunch and Learn series. In this third session of the 2020-2021 series, we will hear from Margaret Edwards, Dean and Professor of the Faculty of Health Disciplines at Athabasca University, Greta Cummins, Dean and Professor at the Faculty of Nursing at University of Alberta, and Olive Young, full and distinguished University Professor at the Faculty of Nursing of the University of Alberta. I will introduce a short bio for each one of the presenters, and I will do it in the order that they will speak. So first, Dr. Margaret Edwards has obtained several SSHRC grants and published in the area of exemplary online education. She has shared her leadership with Athabasca University as a program director, associate dean, and for the last decade as dean. During her time at Athabasca University, Dr. Edwards has led the development of several online master degrees and a continuing exploration by the faculty of best practices on online learning. Now, Dr. Greta Cummins is the current Dean of the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Alberta and a past president for the International Society of Nurses in Cancer Care. She leads the CLEAR Outcomes, which means the Connecting Leadership Education and Research program, which focuses on leadership practices of healthcare decision makers to achieve better health outcome. Olive Young has obtained a number of SSHRC and published grant and published numerous articles and books in the area of preceptorships. This past decade, she has focused her attention on academic leadership, serving as a vice provost, deputy provost, interim provost, and vice dean. Currently, she is researching courage through interviews of academic and non-academic female administrators across Canada. So let's begin in today's session titled Leadership in Education During Times of Uncertainties. Dr. Edwards, Cummings, and Young will explore how leaders can not rely on vision alone and how this becomes obvious during a crisis. They will discuss how a group of Alberta Deans and Directors and other stakeholders reinvigorated a long-standing committee to great benefits in the pandemics. They will situate the work of the group in the theory of holding. If a leader can hold, means mutual supports abounds, work continues, and a new vision eventually emerges. When leaders cannot hold and coworkers can't hold each other, anxiety, anger, and fragmentation ensue. Although they, as nurse educator, healthcare administrators, professional body, and regulators had been meeting for a number of years, this was the first time they came together united with the same problem. The outcomes and lessons learned from the weekly meetings and their ongoing process are illustrative of the power of working together and holding one another to develop workable solution and a new level of trust and understanding. I'll now turn the session over to our presenters. So we begin with Dr. Edwards, then Dr. Cummings, and then Dr. Young.
Thanks, Clemence, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just here to introduce this topic and then hand it off to Greta and then Olive, and then I'll come back again at the end. But what we wanted to do was just give you a sense of what we were going to do today. And in theory, that's where my slides should go forward. So we might have to stop sharing and try again, but really I just wanted to outline the session. So we're going to talk a bit about the theory of holding, then the history and process, and finally the outcomes. We hysterically think that we're going to spend only 5 minutes each on this, and then give time for your questions and comments. What we really wanted today was to describe a process that we came to that was highly effective for managing the COVID crisis for nursing education, and also to share strategies that we gleaned by having different jurisdictions working together. So a co-presentation, all of us will be participating. Olive, I'm going to let you start, and I'm just going to see if I can reshare this screen or get it to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Margie. Yes, all three of us were members of this committee that was, I think you're doing things here, that was chaired by Greta. And so that's our buy-in into this process. So, as you know, as nurses, we start doing things, and then we look for the theory. Unless you're a researcher, you start with a theory and you try to prove or disprove it. But for us, we just started meeting, started making decisions, and started working together. But on reflection, for this presentation per se, we thought about one of the best theories we could talk about was the theory for today, which is holding. Now, typically, when you think about theory in crisis, you think of command and control. And we want command and control. It's a beautiful system. It's regulated through international bodies. But in this case, we thought holding was actually a better theory for us. And it's a way the leaders and people in that committee contained and interpreted what was happening in times of the uncertainty, and a way to soothe the distress that was going on. So this was really important so that we could work and listen to each other. Typically, and I don't know for your provinces, but there is competition for students, for recruitment, for resources, but all of that fell by the wayside when you hold. You don't compete, you hold each other. So next screen. Or can I do it myself?
Don't know what's going on there, Olive, but it's going forward and stopping and not going forward again. So let's try it again.
Okay. You got it. That's nice. And it's number 6. Next one, maybe it's number 7 actually. Oh, there you go. Good for you. So if a leader can hold, and that's a big if the leader cannot hold, none of these things will happen. And all of you, including me, we've all worked with leaders who are non-holding leaders. They cannot hold. They don't have that capacity to do so. But if a leader can pause, can reflect, can sit back, mutual support abounds, and the work continues, and a new vision emerges. And typically, we always say, what's the vision? What's the mission? What are the values? And then we go from there. But this, in times of crisis, as we're all experiencing across the world, we have to have a new vision. The old vision wasn't meant for this time. So as I said below in this slide, if you can't hold, it's anxiety, anger, and fragmentation. And we have that anyways, regardless of holding that is going on right now. There's so many people at all levels that have a great deal of stress and anxiety. Okay, next slide.
I think we can only do one at a time. I don't know what that's all about.
You never slide not for this, did you, Maggie? I'm Margie. I always do that, Margie, sorry. Okay, so how do leaders hold? Okay, well, we'll just go here. So there's leadership holding for the person and how they hold, but then there's also organizational holding, how the institution holds. And this is what you tell people as much as you know. And one of Margie did a survey of the people in our committee, and one of the people said, we made 100% of decisions based on 20% of the information, and that's, we just didn't have it all, and the information keeps on changing from day to day, it seems. But people want to know what changes are they going to have because of this. And we are still teaching clinical. We're still teaching labs with the social and physical distancing, but these are changes. Now, what are the key priorities? Is it people? Is it the economy? Is it keeping students in the nursing program? And who needs to know what? And what do these changes mean for our work? And that was so important. We met every Thursday morning from 8 to 9. What do these changes mean for our work? Because we had all the decision makers around that table, and people were making decisions that we, as the institution and the faculty of nursing, had to follow. We tried our best to hold everyone, every group, to understand and interpret what those changes were. And their little thing, dispel rumors. My gosh, we know in psychology, when you can't see the complete circle, we make up the rest of the circle. And those are the rumors, that's the gossip, those are the speculations. And everywhere you have that circle, that incomplete circle filled with rumors. We cannot stand an incomplete circle. See if the next slide works or not. That's okay. Why don't we? I
think it's come. Olive, can you see the leadership is a we?
Ah, yes, that's good. Yes, so this is really important. You can't expect the leader to be the full holder. We have to role model that leadership as leaders, and then we have to hold each other and encourage each other to hold, because we can't manage it otherwise. And I love this saying, and you've seen this saying, I'm sure, on cards, greeting cards, all sorts of cards. People never forget how managers treated them when they were facing loss. And that's such a common expression in our society. It's those emotions. We never forget those emotions. We remember those emotions and how we were made to be, how we were made to be felt by our leaders or by our coworkers. And I've already mentioned the command and the control. So the references, you see below, you'll see the link for the article below that was used for this holding part. I also went on to TED Talks, my favorite place, and also looked at crisis communication and crisis leadership. And not one of them talked about holding, and that was interesting to me, but it sure fits for, I think, our profession. Okay. I think it turns over to Greta now.
Yeah. So our RN Educators stakeholder group has been meeting since 2008, and we usually met about 2 or 3 times a year. What actually happened in March of 2020, just this year, is we had decided that we would have a meeting primarily with the deans and directors of this group before COVID actually hit and was announced as a pandemic, to address financial pressures in Alberta. And we have all in Alberta, the post-secondary's been given notice last year and this year of multiple double-digit annual and in-year cuts. So it was very, very significant. And then the next week, the pandemic was announced, and we already had this meeting booked to talk about the budget. So we continued to meet, and as it shows here, the membership were the deans and directors of all of the nursing education programs in Alberta. And we also had several government representatives that we've been working with from Advanced Ed and from Health, and the senior vice presidents and executives from the clinical organizations in the province, as well as CARNA representation. And this turned out to be so helpful as we began these meetings. So in the past, the kinds of agenda items that the RN Educators group addressed was topics like precision health, Connect Care, which is a digital health platform, a very exhaustive digital health platform in Alberta Health Services. And we also talked about simulation. We talked about a great deal of educational programming competencies, et cetera, from within the various nursing roles. And we spent a good deal of time just being actually more outward looking from nursing than we were looking at nursing itself. We were looking at government organizations. How could RN educators have an impact on government? How could we have an impact on the health system? How could we have an impact in a variety of areas? And so we spent a great deal of time on future planning and visioning, and those are all important to do, and we felt they were very important at the time, but we weren't as inward looking as we had become. So this is a great quote that came from our survey that we did afterwards, and Margie will be speaking more to that. But the biggest difference was the timeline around the issues. So for example, we would have had prior discussions on the role of simulation in nursing education. So we talked about it from the perspective of how much simulation could be included within a nursing education program, what was the role of that simulation, how it had changed over the years, et cetera. And we had proposed having literature reviews, long-range policy proposals, et cetera. But the difference is now in this group since March, we had to decide, along with the program approval body, what was the role of simulation right now as we were working remotely in meeting competencies in the COVID context. So then the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So the structure of the committee is we started with this first meeting in March, where we had planned to talk about these massive budget cuts and the impact that they would have on our programming. And we met for an hour every Thursday morning from 8 to 9, and we continued that weekly right through to the end of June, and then have moved to bi-weekly and now monthly. And boy, attendance was never an issue. Everyone came out because this was such an important place to connect and to meet and to find out what the latest issues were. We did use an agenda. We had a variety of standing items, which included the budget. And for many of our organizations, in fact, it included our ability to pay for membership dues in a variety of organizations because the budget cuts were so significant. But then it was also, of course, the pandemic. We accepted agenda items prior to the meeting, but also at the meeting, we had regular action items. And fortunately, my assistant was able to provide the support that was needed to get us through from week to week and help with communications. So then a bit about the process. One of the things that we really found is that it didn't matter if you were the dean of a large university or you were the director of a large clinical area, if you were from an urban college or you were from a rural college or an urban university. We were really united very quickly, right at the first meeting and onward, into working together to achieve a common goal. And this goal we decided early, which was ensuring the safe environment for students to learn and continue with their education. We were really motivated, as were the representatives from the clinical settings, that we would continue as much as possible to have our students obtain their clinical education. And where they couldn't initially, the clinical placements were terminated for a short time. We had to move fairly quickly into other forms of simulation, etc. We also did understand that some of the decisions were politically based in a provincial kind of setting. And so that meant that we had to deal with that. And really the key question was who makes decisions and who should be making decisions. And as I alluded to earlier, we were really focused on nursing and nursing education, and the other parties that came to our meeting and were integral into our discussions were really focused on how could they support our nursing education issues during this pandemic. And we also learned once again that information that is shared is not necessarily everything that's on the agenda. There were lots of gems that came out in our roundtable check-in, which we did every week, that reinforced how important that strategy was at every meeting. We just started off in the first few meetings to see, oh, how's everyone doing and what are you working on? And quickly realized that that was an important agenda item for every single meeting. So many of the topics that we discussed were remote versus face-to-face simulation. Clinical placements was a very large topic, and of course, COVID protocols. But every week we learned from a different person, from a different organization, a new gem about how they were planning to tackle one of these issues. And it was a tremendous learning for all of us. So just some of our observations of the group. We've been very impressed every week. Everyone is listening to everyone else, and everyone has learned from each other. There's really been no competition for whether it's speaking up or whether it's for students, etc. So it's been a really important opportunity for pooling knowledge and really also stepping up in some ways to challenge in a nice way, question each other's beliefs and actions. We had a lot of discussions early about what would the impact of this COVID changes be for our current students and our incoming students, and how could we pivot the program extremely quickly, week by week, to continue these students moving forward. And the regulators were at the table, which was so important, and they kept telling us, you need to do what you need to do because you are the experts in education. And you know whether your students have met the entry to practice competencies at the end of their program or not. And that was very refreshing for us to hear. But you could also tell that there was some years of mistrust where we needed to have those in writing, and they became documented through our minutes, through our collaborations. And and those relationships have continued to grow. And now I'm going to turn it over to Margie, who's going to speak about some of the outcomes of this work.
Thanks, Rita. I'm just going to get this thing to go again. It doesn't seem to want to last for very long. You've already alluded to some of the outcomes as well. And I think that one of the greatest things was that this did cut through the communication about who was in clinical, who could go, who couldn't. And really it was the immediacy of the responses that meant the most to us during that time. I think having everybody in the room, if you will, from the regulators to the government and the healthcare providers, really allowed them all to hear the collective voice of the educators. So those who were not educators, I think, learned a great deal because they didn't understand things like what happens when students aren't in clinical, for example, or if they're not in school, then they don't have their student loans. So having the ability as a group to emphasize these things, it wasn't just one university saying this, it was everybody saying this. And I think that contributed a lot to some of the decisions that were made. Greta already spoke a bit about the roundtables and how we were continually sharing intelligence and decisions. And it was really interesting to me because not everybody knew everything at the same time. So some schools would have heard something from somebody and the rest didn't know that. So there was a lot of really valuable exchange there. I think the other thing that was really important out of this is that we also developed some subcommittees. And we started a group on simulation and another one to be focused on NEPAC feedback. And we just now have new draft NEPAC standards that I think that this group will be looking at going forward. I think one of the key pieces out of this whole time is that networks were built that will last for years. We came to know each other in a different way than we have before. And that level of trust and acknowledgement of what each other brings to the table, I think will be something that goes on forever. Already I hear people saying, well, I didn't know what to do about X, so I talked to somebody else at this other university who I met on this call. So I think that that has some really long-term effects for all of us. I think that we've already spoken a bit about whether our decisions are based on evidence or opinion. And it did give us an opportunity as educators to ask those questions of the government, the providers, as well as the approval body. And as Greta and all have said before, we did focus on nursing issues. So we were not looking outside. We were just focused on what we needed to do to be able to do our work. Some of us were farther ahead in technologies and virtual teaching than others. And we had a lot of sharing of resources that I think was really valuable for everybody involved in the process. And again, I think that this continues, which is an excellent outcome. We did a quick little survey monkey of the group, just to ask a few questions around, you know, what was the value of this meeting to you? What could we do differently? How do you see this going forward? And I think the biggest result of the survey really was we're all in this together. And so the value that people identified from this group really was the value that came from sharing the challenges and the resources and learning from each other. One of the quotes said, it was a great sounding board to discuss challenges and to hear how others were overcoming them. So this wasn't something that was theoretical. This was something that was on the ground, you know, boots moving forward kind of thing. Another value came from connecting in real time with the regulator, government departments, Alberta Health, Covenant Health, for immediate problem solving and for collective input. So we didn't have time to wait for the regulator to go back and think about this for a while, or the government to think about this, or AHS and Covenant to think about things, because we needed to know, what are we doing with students tomorrow? And so I think that that real-time connection really helped us to manage this well for our students. let's see if this will, oh, there we go. Some of the other comments that people said that, this gave us a collective voice with respect to issues. This is again where we talked about, we don't all usually sit down with the regulator or with the government departments or with AHS and Covenant. And so instead of hearing from one school, they were hearing from all of us. And interestingly or not, depending on where you came from, the voice was collective. And so we all had the same issues. They might have had different nuances, but this way, the regulators, the government, the providers all heard that we all had the same issues. And I think that that was a really important piece that, that came out of this. Another hope that came out of the survey was that people really hoped that this synergy could be carried forward into future planning, strategy, discussions, and solutions. And I think that that's going to be the case because we have started to work with each other. We know that we can trust each other now, and we have a different level of interaction with our regulators, with the government, and with the providers. And so I think those things really do go forward. Someone else said, I really valued the collegial nature. I felt I could reach out to any of the participants by email and ask follow-up questions. And I think we're seeing that. Certainly anecdotally, a lot of people are talking to each other about other issues and going forward. And then finally, I think the power of everyone coming together and working together for the same goal, seeing the similarities between everyone made it possible for what needed to be accomplished. I hope this has brought everyone closer and that this synergy can be carried into future planning, strategy meetings, discussions, and solutions of the group. And I think that we can already see this. So in the last several weeks, we have come together to develop a common statement about systemic racism. And so rather than just talking about it, which we might have done in the past, this has been actioned. One person took this on, sent it out, people commented, and now all of us have a common statement on systemic racism that we can use within our schools. And so, what started kind of serendipitously, as Greta said, where we already had this meeting planned to talk about other things, we very quickly realized the value of continuing to meet. And then we strategically added all those stakeholders. And I think in reference to what Olive said to begin with, I think this meeting actually became a holding place for all of us. It provided the support and the encouragement that we needed as we were making decisions that affected our programs. I think it also fundamentally changed how we view each other, how we know each other, and how we will work together going forward. And so I'm going to stop there and invite your comments, your questions. Various people who were in those meetings, I think, are on the call. So we'd certainly welcome your comments as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, the three of you, Dr. Edwards, Dr. Cummings, and Dr. Young. So we're watching for questions, for comments as you invited them, Dr. Edwards. So anyone attending this Lunch and Learn series would like to share something, to add to what has been said, or to raise a question or an issue that was part of the presentation, you're most welcome to do it. There's a mention that it was an excellent presentation.
And we'd be really interested in hearing from those of you on the call as well about what happened in your jurisdictions. Have you been held, or have you been the one doing the holding?
There is a question, apart from the question you just raised, there is one that asks, could any of you speak a bit more about the theoretical aspects related to holding?
Yeah, that would be me. Could you just rephrase that question? Just be a bit more specific in terms of the holding. Exactly what's the issue or question in that question?
I think it's more related to the theoretical aspects of holding. I think it was operationalized in your slide, but you're asking, the question seems to relate more to how theoretically the person is adding, are there any more details about holding, any other insight you might like to share?
That's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to give a psychological response to this. And I'm going to say for leadership, it starts with you, typically the leader, and who they are and what they are. And that comes some personality theory, your values that you bring, your personal values, and that become then the professional values. And then I think personally, then you become leadership values. You have to put them all together for you. And when you get experience, which is to me critical, and a mentorship as a leader, if you have a value of servanthood leadership, then holding really makes sense for you, because you are doing you're the servant leader, and you are ensuring that everyone sits at the table. No matter who's at the table, everyone sits at the table and they are part of the table. Just reading a few articles about how to get nurses onto boards, and that's a bit of a problem there. But it's that view of everyone's important, and I serve you as my leader, as a leader. So this is not a time for me as the leader to decompensate, to be angry, to be stressed, to get my people to take care of me, but I take care of them. But for me to do that, I have to have self-care. I have to be healthy. I have to know who I am, because I'm always changing as well. You don't once, now I know who I am. It's not, you're always changing and you're always being stimulated, and you have your own biases. And I love Virginia Satir when she said, I see all of me, but I don't see my back. And so in leadership, I take care of other people's backs. And sometimes my back is big and sometimes my back is small, but I need that feedback. I need to be told what I'm doing. I need to have that team around me that I trust to do that. Mm-hmm. So to me, those are all the components of holdings. I'll just say holding myself as a leader, all those things are important. But if I demonstrate holding, if I role model holding, metaphorically hand holding, eye contact, listening carefully to what you're saying. If you feel hold, then, but I can also encourage you, then hold others. Mm-hmm. And I also believe that how I personally hold my friends and my networks, I bring to work, and I bring the good things from work back to my friends. So it to me, I'm not one person here or one person there. I am a whole. For my co-panelists, anything you'd like to say?
Olive, I think there's a couple of things in there that I would really emphasize. And the first one was, if nobody else is holding you, you have to hold yourself. And I think that all of us on this call are facing a lot of stressors. And, we've talked about orthostatic load a lot and how much stress there is in our lives. And if we don't manage that well ourselves through all those usual, sleep and diet and exercise and all of those things, then we are in no shape to be able to hold anybody else until we hold ourselves first. And then I think the other key piece there was your last comment around modeling or passing it on. And I think that that's true as well, that if you aren't seeing holding, it's really hard for you to hold other people. And so I think that's where we as leaders certainly gained some of that holding from this group. Then we were able to hold our own faculties, and then they were able to hold the instructors and the students and so on. And I think that where we're going to get with this is that, from holding anything, you can't do that forever. And so finding ways to put the holding down for a time and get some refreshment and then pick the holding back up again, I think is pretty important as well. And then just one last comment from me. I think that one of the other pieces that I saw during this time was the need to be talking with and to our faculty a lot. So many more interactions than we might usually have had. And also to be, you said this right at the beginning, Olive, in your discussions, that we need to be telling people what they need to know. So this is a time for absolute authenticity and for having some principles that everybody knows about how you're working through things. So my principle was that we're going to do everything as simply as we can, and that we're going to use the flashlight analogy that, you know, when you're walking with a flashlight, you can only see a little ways in front of you. So we're going to make the best decision that we have, given what we can see. And that fits well with what you said earlier about the making 100% decision with 20% of the information. So yes, we're going to move forward, but we can only move where we can see. And, you know, will we look back and say, oh, probably shouldn't have done that? Highly likely. But we did the best that we could with what we knew at the time. And so I think those are all important parts of holding. Thanks. Greta.
The person who raised the question, thank you for fleshing this out, Olive, and that it was well articulated as an answer. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Would you ask again the question that you raised, Margaret?
Certainly. Really just wondering to know what happened in other people's jurisdictions and whether you have been held or whether you've been doing the holding.
There was someone on the Q&R who said, thank you for sharing your findings. I'm a critical care nursing educator with Horizon Health in New Brunswick. We had a very similar experience with workforce development strategies to resume or update our education delivery to critical care staff. Someone else said that at Cambrian College, both our dean and chair of health sciences have been great at hosting regular check-in session with the faculty and staff. Okay, Olive, you just wrote something.
All right, yeah, I just wrote in for a reference for the people here. That's all. Continue on with your question.
I think there's a comment from Helen Vandenberg in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Helen, I think that budget cuts and a health crisis going together will be a giant challenge for us going forward in Alberta. And I think that we haven't even begun to see what that looks like yet.
No.
We have a new sector report coming out in theory in December. And I think that will have an impact. I think there will be a number of very difficult decisions that have to be made about what we can afford and how we can support each other rather than competing. So, you know, we've looked at standard licenses across the province for better pricing. But I think that we're just about to start finding out what those actually mean. But Greta, you might have more to say about that.
Like Julia said, someone else, Helen Vandenberg, wrote, in creating these networks and meetings regularly with a variety of stakeholders, what kinds of collective issue did you find and how are you tackling them? I'm particularly interested in how you are thinking about maintaining the quality of nursing education in times of both budget cuts and a significant health crisis.
Well, I think as Margie just said, some of the early discussions were around actually increasing our negotiating power across all the schools in terms of pricing for our simulation for other products, PPE, a variety of things. We also spent time learning from each other around how, when it was time to reopen our simulation labs using COVID protocols. Rather than every school doing it completely independently on their own, we learned from each other in these meetings as to how are they approaching it, what were the pitfalls, what are the challenges, etc. And the other thing really were the clinical placements in terms of maintaining and growing those relationships with our clinical partners as to how and when, in what settings we could have students continue in placements and which settings would be best to have some virtual simulation, etc. So it really became a joint effort very quickly. And these weekly meetings help because you always knew you're going to meet your colleagues in the next week to have a discussion about something like that. And there were many more.
I think one of the other pieces that you just raised, Greta, really is around things like simulation, but virtual sim.
Yes.
And so I think, again, we've been catapulted about 5 or 7 years into the future without the in-between work. And so I think nursing education and the financial pieces of that, as well as COVID, will be forcing us and regulators to be looking very carefully at what is essential to be done in labs and in real practice settings, and in what ways virtual sim, whatever we want to call it, can actually help to meet some of those challenges and actually cost less. So I think we're going to be having to think about a lot of these things. You know, there's not been a lot in the nursing literature about how we're using virtual reality. And so, you know, you can get your cardboard virtual reality glasses for $20. How are we in nursing using that to our advantage? So I think that there's a lot of challenges that we can leverage to move this conversation forward.
Donna from Manitoba just wrote, many thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience about holding. In Manitoba, we are preparing for a potential strike from U of M Faculty Association in the midst of a lockdown in the province. I really appreciate how one needs to be compassionate to selves and others, and the need to keep communication channels open during this challenging time.
Helen, I just want to comment on self-compassion. I've been reading and went to a workshop with Christine Neff, and I really think nurses should, as a body, should really understand that work of self-compassion. Because I think if I think about holding, I think that's one of the key concepts. And I'll just give you a little example. When my daughter is a teacher, and she taught her kindergarten students the concept of oh well. And sometimes in nursing, we need to say oh well and let it go, and let go of our perfectionism and our guilt and our rule boundedness, and just say oh well. And in particular during a pandemic and a crisis, if we can't stay bound to the rules that ruled us till now. There's a new reality that we're all experiencing, and we just have to let go. And we're going to, as Margie said earlier, we're going to make mistakes, and then we're going to have to say, oh, well, because we're just doing the very best that we can.
Mm-hmm. Helen Vandenberg wrote, thanks so much for sharing. This is really interesting. I'm so happy to hear about how this networking paid off.
I think one of the other pieces just to mention here is that we've talked a lot about what everybody took away from this in terms of value, but I do think that everybody on our call has now seen how working together can actually work. And so, you know, sometimes we spend a lot of time building structures out of marshmallows and toothpicks, and it doesn't exactly advance where we wanted to go in terms of building working groups or teams, whatever you want to call them. And so I think people now have seen that having an engaged group of stakeholders that meet together to address a problem really can be a powerful way of dealing with issues. And so I'm hoping people will put that in their memory toolboxes when they come up against other situations. And, you know, I think we lucked out here, and I don't know if Greta and all will agree with me, but, you know, the fact that we already had this meeting booked, when we did get together, we didn't talk at all about what the meeting agenda was. We went immediately to addressing COVID. And I sit on an Alberta Deans of Health Programs group as well, and they never met. And so I think that because we had this in place and we could take it forward, it was an immense help to all of us. And I think everybody who has been a part of that will now have that as a strategy when they're in other similar situations. Hope that makes sense.
You know, John Cotter talks about urgency. You can't have a change in, you can't have a problem until you have a sense of urgency. And I think COVID provided that sense of urgency, but we didn't back down. We didn't lie down. We said, okay, COVID's here. What are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And I think nurses are so inclined to do that wherever they work in the world. What are we going to do about it? And away they go. Mm.
Yeah. Any questions, any thought from any of the participants before we conclude?
One of the questions that Margie and Olive and I were talking about earlier is how can we keep this kind of level of engagement among a group like this or in any other province without having a crisis? Is it possible? And can we have the same level of commitment to actually achieve an approach to the issues that we have every day as educators? Or does it take a crisis to do this?
And another insight I had from working with Greta and Margie when we met a few times before this presentation, and I'm going to say this is so not politically correct, but we get carried away with other professions, and we need to sometimes just look at nursing and say, what is happening in nursing, and be nursing centric. And yet, you know, we have to teach about the multidisciplinary, the transdisciplinary, the interprofessional. We have standards across Canada for this. And I sometimes think it's all, that's reality and that's how we all work. But just to step back and just be us focused, that was unique for us, I think.
And for any naysayers, I would say it's not navel gazing. It's really taking care of business and nursing. And that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
And showing some compassionate attitudes towards nursing.
Yes.
And not wait for the others to do it. So I don't see any more question, but I see a lot of thank you for sharing this with us. Great presentation. So I guess, and other who are writing, thank you so much for this presentation. I think you answered the question and you delivered on what you were supposed to present and to share with the others. And we can see that the last comment is very meaningful. So it is very meaningful for the participant to hear from all of you. So thank you again, Dr. Edwards, Dr. Cummins, and Dr. Young. And thank you to everyone who participated today. Please note that the recording of this session will be made available on CASN YouTube channel and circulated to you in the coming days. Please feel free to share. the link with your networks. Thank you again, everyone, and CASN certainly hopes that you will consider attending future sessions this fall, winter, or spring of our Lunch and Learn series. Please visit CASN website and search for Lunch and Learn, and you will get more information. So enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and thank you very much to everyone present and to our presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Clemence.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julia.